I'm Isaac Askew.
And I'm Jeffrey Sherman. And today we're joined by Dustin Rea, CEO of Red Hook Agency, to discuss bringing new products into your current platform and splitting products out within the same platform. Dustin, welcome back. Full transparency for anyone who hasn't seen this before. I have worked with Dustin before, and Isaac has worked with Dustin before. We have not all worked together at the same time. We've all worked together. Cool. Dustin, take it away.
Yeah, so I think today's topic is kind of self-explanatory. I think a lot of us have been in this situation, but came up recently, and I've noticed not everyone has kind of really called it out or really named it. What I call it are multi-product platforms. So I'll kind of give some business context on how this happens. There's a couple different natural paths, right? So one is what I call the natural path. So you may have it in your roadmap that you're serving a specific customer, right? And you start with kind of your one MVP product or your V1. You get that out, you serve that need, and naturally you start hearing from the customer they have other needs, and naturally you might build some of those with features. And over time, there may be something that's going to be big enough of an investment that you could call it, its own product. It's going to have its own name. It's maybe going to have its own branding. It could potentially be its own entity legally. And then from the technical standpoint, you have to kind of figure out how to merge all of those together. The other kind of business approach that I've seen is through acquisition of products. So same thing, you may hear from your customers, hey, we have this need for this additional product. Let's say if you're a CRM, you may want to add a time clock, right? Certain businesses may want to add a time clock. Same business that needs a CRM may need a time clock. Same thing may need SEO, right? There's different things that they may need. So how do you kind of add these different products onto your platform in kind of a sane way? Mm-hmm. So I think that's the topic.
Great. Let's start with the first case where you've got an organically growing, you've got a product. It's, the product and the platform are one, and you've been growing, and now you're starting to say, hey, this thing that we've got, we've got this kind of all or nothing current model where you're a customer, you're not. And now we've got this new thing that maybe we want to charge more for, or maybe we even want to sell it separately, which I think is a big piece. Mm-hmm. And now you're trying to migrate to two products on the same platform within the same platform. What's your first step there?
Yeah, I think the first question is you have to think about your kind of authentication and authorization. That's kind of usually my first thought. Mm-hmm. One big step is, are you going to have shared identity between these two things? So you're thinking of things like identity, billing, do you manage those in the same place, or do I have to log into each product separately, manage my billing there? Are they separate accounts? Do they share an email? If I, sign up one person on this product, do they automatically get the other one, or are the users managed differently? And that can be both a technical and a product discussion, right? Because it could be from the product strategy standpoint that they want to be able to kind of build an enterprise style platform where you're kind of just adding products on, but there's centralized user management that's maybe done by finance or some operations type person. So I think all of those considerations kind of come into play. Those are my first questions. How do you handle authentication, identity, and billing?
So in my mind, if I had a platform and I had two products, to me, I would imagine I would want to have a single, user, and then I would flip things on and off, which creates a lot of difficulty, in terms of if you've got, product A and you're adding product B, that might look one way. But if you've got product B only, making that user experience good is difficult. And then also if you have product B and you now start adding in pieces of A, making that sane and seamless is extremely difficult from what I've seen. The having the permissions and the back end is easy, but the actual UI, the customer experience is very hard.
Yeah, I think some of that comes down to business too, right? Did the business know up front that they would be building these two products? So did the technical team know, right? Because then there's an investment too there to be made, right? If you're going to build this second product, where are you starting from? Did you build your identity service as a separate entity since the beginning to where it can now easily be integrated? Or does this become a project zero to start your next product, right? So it can become as a bigger organization, it may seem like we can move at the same pace as we built the first product, But what you actually find is there's more to it as you're scaling to 2 products. There's more decisions to be made, and more
Right.
trade-offs to think of.
This reminds me of go for it, Isaac.
Oh, I was going to say something similar that I was considering recently was AWS in general. AWS, if you sign in, it's just one account that you've got.
Mm-hmm.
But every service that you look at in AWS, they all look a little bit different. They all act a little bit different. And the styles for each page you go to for Route 53 or EC2 or whatever, documentation is different. They very much seem like they're owned by different teams than they are. Mm-hmm. That's why there's like a lack of the same design and congruency between those products. But in their case, they did start from like what you're suggesting, Dustin, where you have like identity first. Like you're authenticated to access the services, but each of these services and what they do is different, and how you're billed for those services is different, and the products are different. So I think even following that model, it still makes sense, even if you don't have the same shared design between those products. I think it seems fairly obvious that you'd want to tackle that identity piece first. At least that's the way I would do it too.
Yeah, I kind of look at it like a similar problem area is internationalization. Right? If we're all English speakers, if you start off with English, if you build your system to be English and then suddenly you discover that people outside the US exist and they have money, and you need to now internationalize this to have other languages, it's extremely time consuming. It's not difficult, but it's extremely time consuming to go back and wrap every single string on your website so that you can then drop in translations. But on the other hand, if you spend the time up front and wrap every single string so that it can be internationalized later, if it becomes worthwhile, it's a smaller investment, but it may never pay off, right? It's the Yagni versus... I don't remember what the opposite of Yagni is. But anyway, like the
being over prepared, I guess.
You always
need
it.
Yeah, you always need it. But like it, right? It's I guess my first thought is, at this point, there should be enough frameworks with user management externalized that unless you are, the proverbial CEO in their house with an idea and learning to program at the same time, you probably should start with some kind of authentication system that you didn't roll yourself, right? Like if you've got a table of users with passwords in clear text, if you're starting from there, and you shouldn't, then you're in for a world of hurt at some point. And it's a good world of it's great that you've managed to make it, to get so far and get far enough that you're now in for this world of hurt from the security standpoint. But if you're, professional programmer, you should know better, I guess. Like you should be like, yeah, let's spend the extra day and set up authentication correctly, because if we don't set it up correctly at the beginning, it's going to just be terrible eventually, or we're going to get hacked badly.
Yeah. I mean, I see a lot of clients start with, I think, like kind of whatever they can get out. Because think about it especially from the non-technical founder's perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not going to know what you don't know. So you're kind of trusting the developers. And if you think about like what an early stage, like, and I mean really early stage, startup is going through, I mean, they're just getting out whatever they can get to prove, validation. And I think where this gets interesting is like, then you get traction, and then now you have actual users, and now you've acquired another product, right? It's like, so imagine this from the founder's perspective. And then as the the poor engineer, right, you now have 2 completely separate authentication systems and potentially even different paradigms on like how, say user data is like referenced in these 2 systems. And so like if you were to, so let's say, for example, you're talking about like economies of scale, right? How do you get a database engineer, if you have potentially 2 different database technologies, you're now incurring that cost twice if you can't have that one resource handle both of those platforms. So I think there's questions there too. Like, how do you handle that? Is that, do you look towards like a phased approach where you start to bring those technologies together, or do you just kind of handle the difference as a, we'll manage this difference is because the cost is too great, right? To like rewrite, for example, in the correct paradigm, let's say.
Well, correct is always so relative. But
Yeah.
I think so. Let's talk you've acquired somebody and so you have something and it's fine, and you've now acquired somebody and they had something and it's fine, but your thing is incompatible with their thing. Let's say one is a MySQL, one is a PHP framework using MySQL and it's fine, and you just acquired someone and it's a Java Postgres system, and it's also fine, right? Like they're totally fine, but they're entirely different technologies. They don't play great together. So I guess the first shim that usually people do, like the go-to, is you create a merge service, like an eventual consistency service, which it's a piece of software that listens or polls every minute or two both systems. It says, hey, do you have any new users? Great. If you have a new user here, I'm going to create it over there, and vice versa. And so you have this piece of software that is just an eventual consistency machine of, hey, I'm going to, every period, or maybe there's a way to poke it, and it's going to do the sync for you. And that's pretty good. That'll get you a year down the road before that.
So it's like a bridge. This is like a bridging technique, yeah.
Yeah,
to get from where you are to where you want to be, yeah.
Because like that, it buys you time. Because now you've got, hey, the core platform, we're in PHP, MySQL. We bought somebody there in Postgres, Java, and leadership has to figure out how that's going to work. And the bridge buys you time. It's relatively lightweight, and now you can figure out, do your custom, like, was it a mistake, right? Because sometimes you buy a company and it's a mistake, or you don't, you thought everyone would love to use it reciprocally and they don't. Like I've seen that where we bought a company and these customers love this product, and these customers, product A loves product A and they don't like product B, and product B likes product B, and so like, screw it, we're just going to keep running them separate.
Yeah.
Or spin it off again. I've seen all of that. But the idea, in leadership's mind when they bought this thing was that it'll converge. And so, how is it going to converge? Are you, heaven forbid, rewriting everything in one of the two languages over time? Or you, even worse, moving to a third platform? Because everyone should be running Clojure Postgres, clearly. If you're going to pick my favorite, which don't actually do that. It's a great language.
Disclosure.
And I love it. Yeah, but don't actually rewrite for a language, especially not Clojure. But the bridge, I think, is the first step, and then then it's a lot of product and leadership discussion about where do you want to go.
So to clarify, you're saying start the bridge to begin with, just to buy time. That way you can gauge and see if your customers actually care about it. And if they don't care about it, then give up on the idea of trying to even do that, all the work and the money that you would spend to merge them to begin with. And if they do care about it, then it's a different conversation that you bought time for.
Right. And in the meantime, now you've got customers in both places, right? And within, a minute or so, the merge happens, or 5, whatever your thing is, and it gives you the opportunity to gather data about what pieces they care about, and learn. The engineers can now learn the two systems, so that they can figure out what parts, what. Because maybe the answer is you move the identity out of both systems into a third system, right? You start using standard stuff like JWT, and you never bridge the gap, right? You have this stack and that stack, and identity is just a third piece that both of them use.
So we've talked a little bit about, I think, the conceptual and the strategy of it. Let's say you're a director or VP of engineering at a company that's just acquired a new product, or you're a founder, building a team, if you're making that jump for the first time from going from single product to multi-product, how do you imagine they should be looking at their department or their organization to change as they make that change? Like, what new functions need to exist that maybe didn't need to exist when you were just working on a single product? Because let's say the single product could be a monolith, right? So everyone kind of worked on the back end team, did identity, they did security, they did all the APIs, and like all the APIs are one API. You know, they handle the database, right? So as you're kind of making that jump, you know, how do you start to reorganize your teams to support that structure?
What is it, Conway's Law, where the software will look like the company's organization?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ideally, don't do that. Don't do Conway's Law. Think about what the product is. You know, but what are these two products and how are they different, and where's the seam? I think on the back end, you can start by thinking, okay, you can always start it by thinking about how you're going to move the identity out of the monolith and into something, and how the billing system is going to reconcile these things, and how you're going to turn features on and off. Because what I see a lot of times is I have a monolith, and now I'm saying that the monolith is two products, and that's cool, but it's still one monolith, and everything is shipping inside. And then that's when all sorts of interesting hacking starts happening, because it's like, oh, you know, you've got a feature, and this feature works off this database table that you don't actually have access to, but I'm just going to create these dummy records because the code needs it. And she's going to start seeing customers that have feature B also have a ton of records, dummy records that relate to feature A, but they're not real because you just needed something there. And that's where things get interesting. So I guess I'd start with figure out what the seam is and how to isolate the two products from the back end and front end perspective. You know, start looking to split the monolith more than the identity part.
Makes sense.
There's another interesting case that I've been a part of one time. I think it's an interesting edge case where I was working at a company, and the company was not a SaaS or anything. It was just a company, and they had software. And they acquired another competing company that did the same thing, and not a product. But now they wanted the software, the platform itself, to become a SaaS and run on in this new company that they acquired to become the second customer. So imagine you have a product. You don't have a product. You have a platform, and the company runs on the platform. And now all of a sudden you need to say, hey, we're actually a SaaS with one customer, and now we need to rethink things, and we're going to have two customers.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting exercise.
Yeah, I've seen something like this too when you take internal tools and they become, well, actually, this should be a product that we want to now go public with. So now you have to go through like branding exercises. You have to deal with authentication because you maybe even have organization structures from within the company that was within the internal tool. And now you need to be able to duplicate that as almost like a multi-tenant structure, and that may not be something that the internal tool is doing on its own. So yeah, I've seen that as well. Similar problem.
We had an episode on that probably a year and a half ago with guest Brian Beggy. He talked about companies that wanted to convert their internal tools to SaaS. And if I remember the conversation correctly, he said it almost always goes badly. What's your experience been?
That's interesting. I think I've only done it once, where we actually turned an internal product to an actual external product, and it was successful in a way. I mean, I would say it was a success in the fact that it didn't shut down, but it's not like rapidly growing like Slack because it's very niche. So it's like it takes a bigger conversion than like if you were to build the SaaS from the beginning, you would probably build it in a different way, right? So like you maybe have a different starting point than the internal tool does. So it's like it works really well if you already have that exact problem and you already want to move your business from where you're at to exactly that new paradigm. But it doesn't do a good job of like getting you from like a bad position to like up to this maneuver. And I think that's what they're working on now, right? And I think that's kind of the if it is successful, it kind of happens in a backwards way. So then now you have to go back and like build your entry points and your onboarding and like kind of the stuff that a normal SaaS would have started with, in order to kind of like ramp up your scale, because it's only like it's just very, very niche. So you want to like broaden and then pull people towards the more niche, higher in value. That's how I've seen it happen.
Yeah, that's a great call out, because now that I'm thinking about it, if you started a second, like if you've got a monolith and you're calving off a second product, that second product doesn't have any of the on-ramp stuff. So that might also be an interesting way to start, more than look at how you're going to split the monolith and look at what do we need to do to create the on-ramps for this new product, because they don't exist.
Right. And there's really two on-ramps, right? Because there could be, from the perspective of we're onboarding completely new users directly to this product as an entry point to our platform. And there's also the on-ramp of the easiest customer to convert is an existing customer. So if we can convert 30% of our existing customers immediately, we want that to be a different onboarding experience, because they don't need to start from scratch. They're familiar with us. They may know certain parts of the platform depending on how well it's integrated. So you may even have a special onboarding path for existing customers.
Yes. There is, dare I say it, synergy. Excellent. Yeah, I recommend people go back and listen to the episode with Brian Beggy. His conclusion was that it's very hard to convert internal tools to a SaaS because the company is competing with their potential customers. It's like one of the examples was, I think, insurance. And it's like, oh, we've got this great way to run your insurance company, but also we're running an insurance company that's competing with you. So that made it a harder sell. Have we covered everything? Do we leave stones unturned?
I think that was it on my list.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone, for listening. I'm Jeffrey Sherman.
And I'm Isaac Askew, and this is Never Rewrite.
Oh, and Dustin, one last thing. If people